before we get into CloudFormation, I just want to talk about the problem with manual configuration, okay? So let's go back to our friend Manuel. Manuel, who we said does everything manually, really is doing his cloud infrastructure operations through, let's call it click ops. Going through the console, tick, 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 tick. It doesn't click chops, click ops. Terrible handwriting, yeah? Basically, operations through clicking, okay? Basically allowing you to somewhat easily configure your cloud infrastructure through the UI. And it's just as easy to start new cloud offerings, to run a quick prototype, to do a quick architecture, but it's not without its own shortfalls. You see, in the not so distant past, if you wanted to build a new software company, you had to go to the shops and let's call it App Co Limited. Okay, that's our company. And in order to have this, remember we said we had to go to the shops and we had to buy a lot of hardware, a lot of racks and servers and the like. And the difficulties with this too, I had to set up cabinets and racks and load up all these servers together with wiring and install cooling and build up redundant power systems and so on. And it made sense to have then a team, typically called developers or devs, dedicated to doing what devs do best, which is writing software. They get their laptops, the ones with all the stickers, we've seen them before, and they write their app. It also was typical to have then another team, and I'll get rid of Manuel. Ugh, not like that. But I would put Manuel in this category too. We would call this team operations, or ops for short. Okay. And you know what ops did? Ops would manage the hardware. So these folks were the ones actually taking care of this. The typical dev team would build an application, they would bundle it up together, and they would toss it over the wall. That's how it would get over that say, okay? So for them to ship their product in order to get the app online or out there, it was then given to the operations people who would then run it on the hardware. Then, I mean, think about it from this point, you've now got to figure out, well, how do I deploy this? How do I run this application? Most of this was done manually because Manuel, and in part this was unavoidable because a lot of that work was done with physically going, on your knees and having to hook up our hardware, racking servers and hooking up the network cables. But even the ops, the work that they did in software, like actually installing the application and the dependencies, was often done manually by executing commands one at a time on a server. This works well for a while. It's fine. I mean, it's how it is. But then as our company starts to get, a little bit successful, money starts to come in. So look at us, Mr. Moneybags. As we start to grow and grow and grow, we start to hit into problems. More money, more problems. Okay, it typically plays out like this because when you release, these things are done manually. As the number of servers increase, when there's more to serve, releases then, they get slower because they do. Releases become more painful. Releases become more unpredictable. And then that leaves us and the poor ops team at Manuel over here kind of in an awkward spot. They often make mistakes. And you often end up with very, very delicate looking servers when there's mistakes being made. Where in which even within my drawings here, these servers have slightly different configurations from all the other ones. This is a problem known as configuration drift. Okay? Because they're slightly different and that's a consequence of doing manual operations. It's inevitable. Okay? As a result of this, what do you think happens? When you've got slightly different servers in slightly different ways, what do you think comes up? What's a consequence of having this? A symptom perhaps of having unpredictable computers. What do you think is naturally going to come up? I'll give you a clue. Sometimes they look like this. Creepy crawlies.
Errors.
Terrible. Yes. That's a terrible drawing of a bug. But errors, let's say, yeah. Problems. The number of errors increase. The developers, you know what they say? Don't care. Why would they? Because it works. Not necessarily malware. It's what they've built. And the developers are very proud people. And what they say is a phrase that's almost become like a biblical now. Don't know what you're talking about. Works on my machine. Because my machine has got a big old fruit on the back of it and it works just fine. It works for me. I don't know what you're talking about. Outages, though, are real. Outages become more and more frequent. And actually, there was an article I read about this, a way of referring to this problem. Moo. Okay. So there's a clue on screen. Cattle versus pets. DevOps Explained. Maybe I'll find a better article if you don't mind. Sort of like this. Okay, maybe we can split it out. All right. So on one side, we've got yourselves a big beefy cattle. Okay, a cow. Obviously, I'm referring to a server here. Servers that are treated like cows, like cattle, in the fact that they're all alike and that they are many of them. They're part of a herd. So cattle servers, they're treated as something identical. They're treated as something replaceable. One of those beefy units has a problem. Do you know what we do? Yeah, I know. We replace it with another one. We just go and get ourselves another cow because who's going to miss a cow? As horrible as it sounds, you just get another virtual machine. That one's a bit dodgy. Let's make a new one. We just simply replace it with a new one. And so what we do is we automate things with auto-scaling groups, with automation tools like a shepherd, really. If one gets sick, if one gets sick, it doesn't really affect the rest of the herd because, again, part of the herd, they're all the same. You can just get yourself another one. But what animal do developers and the internet folk cherish above all else? What little thing you might have on your lap that purrs when you touch it do people love online more than anything? So on the one side, you've got cattle servers. And on the other, you've got yourself your kitten servers, your pets. Okay. Now, folks who have owned or have had a cat, maybe now. Do you have a cat? And if so, does your cat have a name? So if you have maybe a cat or a dog, tell me about. I know you do because we talked about this before. So what was the name of your little pets, if you can? No one's got a pet. No one's got an animal. No one's got has had an animal, a cat or a dog or a fish, or an anteater. Well, I'll tell you. Okay. I used to have a little Lola, Fudge. Okay. Now let's talk about Fudge, Graham. Do you give Fudge a lot of attention, a lot of care? Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I might still have a picture of him somewhere. Somewhere. I won't bother looking for him. Okay, so you give Fudge. I'm presumably you gave Fudge a name. It didn't name himself, and I'm assuming, or I suppose you gave Fudge a name and you gave him attention. And you gave him because he's special. And if Fudge gets a little bit sick, do you make a big fuss out of Fudge? Yeah, you do, of course. And so that's a pet server. It's very special because we're manually managing them because they're special. They're very special and they're very delicate too. And so when we need a bit more capacity, we might need to add to an existing kitten or an existing dog or get another unique kitten or another unique dog. But the trouble is, if that kitten has a problem, and I know because I have a sister and ours passed away earlier this year, it disrupts the whole house. Okay. So yeah, it works on my machine. The ops team, who are tired of getting woken up at 3 a.m, after every single release, after every cadence, when this is getting slower and slower, the release cadence is going back to like, say, a week, then a month, and then every 6 months, and then weeks become biannual releases, and then teams starting to merge all of their projects together. This is my stuff, and that's your stuff, and then that's leading to a whole mess of conflicts. And gosh, once you start to get into conflicts, there's no way out. Conflict hell, we call it merge hell. There is no deeper realm. That's when okay. At this point, no one's able to stabilize the release branch. No one's able to make sense of whose code is what. Teams start blaming one another. Pointers, everyone's blaming one another. Silos begin to form of data stores, and then the company suffers. The company starts to grind to a halt. It's the end of the world. It's pure anarchy. Run for the hills. But that was then. So what trends in IT? What have IT departments begun to do in the last 15 years? See, we've started to see a shift now from the way that things were, because a lot of it seems to be around the way that we've got these two people on screen. So the things that we're obviously here for, AWS and the cloud, is we start to see, instead of companies managing their own data centers, many companies are moving to the cloud. Many companies are starting to take advantage of AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google CPU. Instead of themselves investing and buying in all that special hardware, what the ops team start to do is they get their lattes and they start to work on the software using tools like Chef, using tools like Puppet and Terraform and Docker and Kubernetes. And more of their job seems to be software based now because they don't have hardware to manage. They don't physically have them. Yeah. So if it's not in front of them, they're tied to the keyboard. I mean, they're more working on the code. They're working on the software. And at that point, if these people are working on software, and that's what the devs used to do, this is, no, at what point do we distinct them? The sysadmins are writing their code because we said the dev team were working for the application code. That's what they were responsible for. Yeah. And because now both the dev and the ops team spend most of the time working on software, the distinction between the teams is blurring. So nowadays, it sort of makes more sense for, it might still make sense in some cases to have a separate team for application code and another team just for the operational code. But it's clear that both dev and ops need to work more closely together.